Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 10 running back starter sits for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about news around the National Football League, then getting into the matchups at the running back position for Week 10, then talking about my top 36 running back rankings. Before we begin, let me remind all of you, there are many bye weeks this week. In fact, there are 6 teams on bye, and the running back position, it may be thin this week, but I'm going to try to help you guys as much as I possibly can in order to make sure that your running back position is locked and loaded for this weekend. Before we begin, also, let me remind all of you, if you guys haven't yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community. Also, don't forget to click the bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. And also, if you like today's video, don't forget to click the like button. Hey guys, how's it going? All right, I don't know what happened there, but we're moving on, and we're talking about the running back position. But before we get into that, let's talk about news around the National Football League. A lot of news broke this morning. A lot of stuff that we were pretty much anticipating was basically just confirmed this afternoon. So starting off, Cam Newton, his ankle injury was not getting any better, dealing with that Liz Frank injury. He is going to be sent to the injured reserve. His season is over. Kyle Allen will continue to be the starting quarterback for this team going forward, and if they're trying to make a playoff push, he's going to try to lead them there. Obviously, on the back of Christian McCaffrey, if you perhaps got Christian McCaffrey'd this past weekend and he dropped 30-plus points on you, I'm sorry to hear about that. I am also a victim of a Christian McCaffrey performance this past week. Another piece of information, Gardner Minshew has been benched. Nick Foles will be the starting quarterback after the bye week here in Week 10. The Jaguars are on bye. So that is very interesting. I think that pretty much keeps the value of DJ Chark, of Conley, of D.D. Westbrook, of Fournette, and maybe even increases their value going forward. Also, Nick Foles, if you guys go and check his fantasy playoff schedule, his week 15 and 16, quite juicy, something I might want to invest in. Maybe pick up a player like that. Moving on, Le'Veon Bell had an MRI on Monday. The entire situation's a little sketchy, right? He hasn't been playing well, or hasn't been playing up to where we thought he would be at this point. I mean, he was good, right, fantasy-wise, but we expected more, especially with the matchups that we've seen. I mean, Miami should have been a free win, regardless. The issue at this moment is that the Jets went out and they picked up Josh Adams, formerly of the Eagles last season, a guy that contributed as their starting running back late in the season with all the injuries they had. The question currently sits, is Le'Veon Bell healthy enough to play this week? Is he going to practice fully at all this week? And is the Jets organization going to give us any light on the situation, or are they going to keep us in the dark and have us guess on whether or not Josh Adams, Ty Montgomery, or Bilal Powell is the starting running back, assuming perhaps if Le'Veon Bell does not decide to play or is injured, either one. So we'll go ahead and, we'll keep an eye on that as of right now. As you can see, he's my number 12 running back on the week. So hopefully nothing is too significant, but I do have the little the plus sign next to him because he's injured. It's a little injury sign. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, moving on. Other pieces of information. Speaking of injured running backs, James Conner. According to Mike Tomlin, he is very optimistic that James Conner can play today. We will talk about where I have him ranked a little bit later in the episode, but it is good to hear that already Mike Tomlin, who is in the ear of the goodness gracious, the training staff for the Pittsburgh Steelers, at least he gets a little bit of understanding on where James Conner's progression is in terms of healing from this injury and what his timeline is. And the fact that he says he's optimistic that he can play this week is only better for us fantasy owners. But for those of you who don't own or do own Jaylen Samuels and not James Conner, then maybe this isn't the greatest news. Moving on, Mark Walton, running back for the Dolphins, has been suspended. Kallen Ballage will be the starting running back of that team going forward. If you aren't interested in the upcoming schedule for that offense, it is very favorable. Potentially, I know they're tanking, but you never know, something could happen. Kallen Ballage is probably available in almost every league, considering he hasn't done anything all year long. And moving on to the last piece of information, Brandon Cooks, wide receiver for the Rams. A couple weeks back, exactly 2 weeks ago, I was talking about Brandon Cooks because he has sustained his 5th concussion in his short NFL career, 2 within a month and a half. This is not good, and the current timeline for his return is unknown. So chances are he is not returning for a significant amount of time, similar to how Sterling Shepard missed a great amount of time, nearly a month of the season due to the double concussions in one season. Brandon Cooks will be dealing with the same. Therefore, I believe you should be picking up Josh Reynolds if you are a Brandon Cooks owner. I wouldn't say to drop him, but I would say if you are in desperate need and you are trying to make a playoff push, I don't expect him to be back for a little while. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Now that we've covered all of the news for today, let's talk about the matchups at the running back position going into Week 10. And oh my goodness, can we believe it? I mean, I personally cannot believe it. The worst defense against opposing running backs thus far this season through 9 weeks. It's not the Cincinnati Bengals. It's not the Dolphins. By goodness, it's the Lions. The Lions of all teams. The Detroit Lions have come out of nowhere to become the worst defense to opposing running backs on a weekly basis. Goodness gracious, are they getting destroyed or what? As of late, have been we saw what Josh Jacobs was capable of doing against that defense. He absolutely managed and handled that defensive up front, box. I don't even know what are the front 7, front 8. It didn't really matter what they put in front of him. He was able to dominate the entire game. All in all, the Detroit Lions being the worst team, that only is helpful for David Montgomery coming off of 2 20-point games. Coming into this week, we could see another one. There's always a potential of that. So that's very exciting. Moving on, Cincinnati Bengals coming off the bye week. They will be playing against the Ravens, and Mark Ingram looked very good against the New England Patriots, a team that is going to struggle against the run in the coming weeks against better offenses. But all in all, Mark Ingram, unfortunately, he's going to get a lot of his touchdowns stolen from Lamar Jackson. That's just a product of the system. But the fact that Gus Edwards was also taking some touchdowns, a little concerning, but I still have some confidence that Mark Ingram's going to get the job done, which he certainly should. Moving on, the Kansas City Chiefs get to take on Derrick Henry. If we go back a couple years and we look at what Derrick Henry did to them in that playoff game, in that wild card matchup, in which the Chiefs had it pretty settled, and they had the game pretty much locked down. But in the fourth quarter, here comes Derrick Henry running all over that defense. There's a potential that we could see another one of those performances where Henry's just running all over that defense. And if I was to put money on it, there's probably a good chance of that, potentially happening. Moving on, the Dolphins. Here we are. The Dolphins came down all the way to the 4th spot because I don't even know how. It just doesn't make sense to an extent. But I think Marlon Mack and the Indianapolis Colts will be able to take advantage of said matchup. I think Marlon Mack, a great running back, due to the fact that Jacoby Brissett, I didn't mention this in my news portion, but Jacoby Brissett dealing with an MCL sprain. He's day-to-day. He potentially won't play this week. Therefore, Brian Hoyer will be the starting quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts. And I do expect them to run the ball heavily against this, the team of the Miami Dolphins. This past week, they weren't able to run the ball heavily enough because they didn't maintain the lead. Chris Boswell for the Steelers had the kicking game lined up and kept that lead for that team. But as of right now, the way I see it, there's a good chance that Marlon Mack on the thumbnail could have a good week against Miami. Moving on to Carolina Panthers. Okay, what are we talking about here? The Carolina Panthers in the last 2 weeks have been getting destroyed. First with Tevin Coleman, right? Tevin Coleman has a monster week, destroys them for 4 touchdowns. Then this past week, we're thinking, well, why isn't Derrick Henry going to do that? Absolutely does. Torches that defense. Here comes Green Bay after getting handed a game, after getting whooped by the LA Chargers in Los Angeles, where it was pretty much a home crowd for the Green Bay Packers. They get to go back home to Lambeau. They get to take on this Carolina Panthers defense. If Aaron Jones can't get back on track, I'm going to be very surprised. I think Aaron Jones and Jamaal Williams should be good this week against that front 7. Moving on, speaking of the Green Bay Packers, they are giving up the next most points to opposing running backs. That is only good for Mr. Christian McCaffrey. It doesn't really matter what you put in front of him. He's still balling out every week. The Washington Redskins this week. I think they're on bye week. Yeah, the Washington Redskins, they are on a bye week. Moving on. The Chicago Bears, another team giving up a lot of points to opposing running backs. Will the Detroit Lions be able to take advantage of that? I don't think so. We'll see what Ty Johnson's capable of doing. Maybe they want to sign somebody else. The Cleveland Browns get to take on Devin Singletary, who has just been anointed. They haven't really publicly stated that he is the starting running back yet, but it's only in time, and I think that he's going to have another big week here. Moving on, the Los Angeles Chargers, a team that will take on the Oakland Raiders on Thursday night. Josh Jacobs in line at home for another huge game, another big performance. He's a pretty top running back on the week. But regardless, let's move on. Let's talk about some of the tougher matchups. Houston Texans going on to a bye week. The Baltimore Ravens taking on Joe Mixon. That's going to be hell for him, especially with Ryan Finley being the starting quarterback of that team. The quarterback change is going to affect the running game, certainly because they're going to bring pressure. And they're going to blitz, and they're going to force this young quarterback, inexperienced quarterback, to try to win the game with his arm. And they're going to test this guy, especially against the cornerbacks in the secondary of this Baltimore Ravens. They have the capabilities of doing so, of blitzing and playing man coverage the whole game. And they're going to do that exactly. And they're going to test this guy. Mixon shouldn't be great. But I'm hoping he can produce something. The Indianapolis Colts, obviously Kallen Ballage, good luck. Pittsburgh Steelers, Todd Gurley, good luck. Hopefully you're healthy off of a bye week. I doubt it. Moving on, the Philadelphia Eagles. They get to play against, who did the Eagles play? Are the Eagles on bye? They are on a bye week. Moving on. Then we have the Minnesota Vikings taking on Dallas Cowboys. I'm not really afraid of that. The San Francisco 49ers taking on Chris Carson, who had the first 100-yard game against the Tampa Bay defense, who was all scary. That's so scary. No. Chris Carson's gotten on lock. They're running all over them, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Speaking of them getting ran all over, they get to take on the Cardinals. Maybe David Johnson comes back this week, but either way, Kenyan Drake's going to get it done. And then we have the Saints playing against Devonta Freeman, who will probably get majority of his work in the passing game. And then we have the New England Patriots on a bye week. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about my top 36 running back rankings on the week, shall we, everybody? All right. I'm fired up. I'm ready to go. Week 10. We're trying to make the playoff push. For those of you, we have 4 weeks? We have 4 eligible weeks, perhaps maybe even more, depending on how your league works. But week 10, 11, 12, and 13, we have 4 weeks to pick up 4 wins in order to get us past that hump. If you're sitting at a negative record, you're sitting at 4-5, you still have a great opportunity. If you're sitting at 3-6, you still have a great opportunity of making the playoffs. It can be done, and we are going to try to get it done. Again, before we begin, rankings are always subject to change, and a lot of these players are typically in the top 12 every single week, not by accident and not by matchup, but because they are the best, they are the elite, they are the RB1s for this week. Man, that rhymed, and I didn't try. Here we go. My number 1, Christian McCaffrey. Again, like I mentioned, he plays against Green Bay. Does not matter who he's playing against. He is matchup proof. I got Christian McCaffrey this past week in one of my more important leagues, and I didn't feel good about it. I definitely could have won the game, but Christian McCaffrey is a monster of his own. And next year, when everyone's talking about RBs to be the RB1, he is the number 1 RB probably for next year also. So, he's the number 1 every single week. Again, there's an argument for him to be number 1 every single week, even when he's on bye week. So we'll see when that happens. All right, moving on. Number 2, Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley was bottled up last night against the Dallas Cowboys defense. Not too much of a surprise. I do think that they're not feeding him the ball enough, especially through the air. We saw him get a huge chunk and a huge play in the passing game. They need to have him run routes, not just have swing passes. Run routes. This is a very good football player, yet they are not utilizing him to his greatest ability. Either way, this week they get to play against the Jets. Should be an easy matchup, and I do expect Saquon Barkley to be able to run all over this Jets defense. Moving on to number 3, Alvin Kamara. Hopefully Alvin Kamara is fully healthy. We have not seen him play in 3 weeks here. He had a bye week last week. The 2 prior weeks he missed. Latavius Murray picked up where he left off. Latavius Murray had 30-point games in each of the 2 performances in which Alvin Kamara was not there. Now that Alvin Kamara comes back, they play against the Atlanta Falcons, such a bad defense. We've seen Alvin Kamara be a monster against this team. We've seen him have games in which he's catching the ball 15 times against this defense. I expect him, Drew Brees, Michael Thomas, this trifecta to continue to be as elite as they've been all season long. Hopefully Alvin Kamara is ready to go because I have him as my number 3 this week. And I have a lot of confidence that he's going to be able to get it done. All right, moving on to number 4, Dalvin Cook. Unfortunately, Dalvin Cook could have had a bigger week. This week takes on the Dallas Cowboys, front 7. Dallas played well. But I don't think that the offense is there for the Giants. It's not as developed and it's not as run heavy as I think it should be. For as talented as their offensive line is in Dallas, they don't run the ball like the Minnesota Vikings do. They run a downhill scheme where their offensive linemen are getting onto linebackers and really making it hard. And I think that's what's going to happen. They're going to make it hard for guys like Sean Lee and Jalen Smith to make plays. Sure, Dallas has a good defensive line, but I do expect Dalvin Cook to be able to perform, whether it's on the ground or through the passing game. He's my number 4 on the week. Moving on to number 5. Speaking of Dallas, on the opposite side of that matchup, we have Dallas's Ezekiel Elliott playing against the front 7 of the Minnesota Vikings. Here's the thing. We saw Damien Williams crack off a big run, but outside of that, really wasn't able to get much. That being said, I think Ezekiel Elliott behind his own offensive line has been unbelievable thus far this season. Yesterday, averaged nearly 7 yards per carry. Didn't even need to get near the end zone because he was just dominating. And he was setting up his team with play actions. There's a reason why Jason Witten had like 7 catches yesterday, or at least like 10 targets or something. The dude was, I don't understand why Dak throws him the ball so often. But, he was the number 12 tight end for last week, so it's okay. Anyway, talking about Zeke. My only concern with Zeke, the only reason Zeke doesn't sit, higher in the list is because he doesn't see any targets. The dude is not getting work in the passing game, and it is extremely frustrating. Why is Tony Pollard coming in for extra, screen passes that 100% Zeke could have caught, taken to the house, and easily scored? I will never understand that. Kellen Moore can maybe answer me. Maybe Jason Garrett doesn't know what he's doing. He's just there and he smiles and he chews his gum. But either way, Ezekiel, trust me, I used to be a Cowboys fan. I can criticize as much as I want. Ezekiel Elliott should be fine. He's my number 5. Moving on to number 6, Marlon Mack. I did talk about him a little bit earlier. There's a reason why he is on the thumbnail. Marlon Mack gets to take on the Miami Dolphins defense with his offensive line, with Brian Hoyer at quarterback. It only spells a run-heavy game. I expect them to do exactly what the Pittsburgh Steelers did weeks ago with running the ball heavily, running downhill, and dictating the game with the run. Marlon Mack should be an incredible running back and a great play this week. This is one of the, if not his best matchup rest of the season. This is it. So I think Marlon Mack in store for a pretty good game here. He's my number 6 on the week. Should be fun. Again, a guy like Marlon Mack, even though he hasn't seen production like he saw last year. Last year, Marlon Mack was known for, hey, I missed the first 4 games of the season. Or actually, he missed 3 games, came back, 1 got hurt, missed a game, then came back. Regardless. Missed 4 of the first 5 games. Then once he came back, the dude scored 12 touchdowns in 11 games. That's something we haven't seen, but we are eventually going to get back to that. In the last couple weeks, his rushing attempts, 29, 18, 19, 21. We're getting back to a offense for the Indianapolis Colts in which we're running the ball heavily, getting the ball into the red zone, and then hopefully finding him in the end zone because to be honest, without a touchdown, Marlon Mack is a 10-point guy at best. So I think this week the matchup just helps him far too much. All right, moving on to number 7, Josh Jacobs. Like I was mentioning, Josh Jacobs has been on fire. The dude is a top 12 running back in the National Football League, finding the end zone. Doesn't get too much work in the passing game, but boy, he doesn't need it this past week. 28 carries, 120 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. There's a reason why the Detroit Lions now give up the most points to opposing running backs is because Josh Jacobs is responsible for that. And the offensive line, they're going to come off this short week after picking up a good win against the Detroit Lions. They're going to try to parlay that into another win here against the division rival Los Angeles Chargers. It should be a fun matchup, and I think Josh Jacobs is the key for the Raiders winning on Thursday. So he's my number 7. Moving on to number 8, Aaron Jones, playing against the Carolina Panthers. Again, just in terms of what they've been responsible for, they have given up 6 touchdowns to opposing running backs. Sorry, 7 touchdowns to opposing running backs in the last 2 weeks. 4 to Coleman, 2 to Derrick Henry, 1 to Raheem Mostert. They're going to get destroyed. Their front 7, I don't know where Kuechly went. I don't know where Kawan Short went. Where is Dontari Poe? What happened? What is Shaq Thompson? I don't understand. Where is the linebackers for this defense? Eric Reed's not coming down making plays. They're just getting completely plastered. So as of right now, Aaron Jones should be a good play. He's going to be able to reestablish himself off that it was really bad performance overall for the offense. I think that's the reality check they needed so that they can get back into it moving forward. All right, moving on. Number 9, Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb will have Kareem Hunt on his side. Is Kareem Hunt going to be a play? I want to talk about this right now. I want to see what they're going to do with Kareem Hunt before I commit to Kareem Hunt. So that's my thought process there. We'll talk about it a little bit more at the end of the video. Timestamps are down below, as you know. But talking about Nick Chubb, the guy's been great. Unfortunately, plays in an offense where even the head coach doesn't even know what he's doing. They don't know what they're doing. They're giving him the ball 20 times a game on the ground. That's perfectly fine. But we don't know what we're doing as an offense is not a good enough excuse for me to be able to trust a guy like this. Thankfully enough, he plays against the Buffalo defense. If we want to talk about what Buffalo's been allowing in the last 2 games, let's go over it, shall we? I mean, the Eagles, right? Just the Eagles alone. 96 yards to Jordan Howard, 74 yards to Miles Sanders on the ground, both of them. This past week, we had 40-year-old Adrian Peterson whip off for 108 rushing yards and 130 total yards from scrimmage. You cannot tell me that Nick Chubb is not going to be able to have a monster game here. I expect him to do so. Now, will Kareem Hunt potentially take carries? Sure. Will he kill his value? Absolutely not. I do not believe that is the case, but only time will tell again. All right, moving on. Let's talk about number 10, Derrick Henry. Good old Derrick Henry gets to take on the Kansas City Chiefs. If you want to beat the Chiefs, you have to keep their offense off the field. That has always been the case, whether it's Patrick Mahomes or not. They are far too talented. They have too many playmakers for you to allow them to stay on the field and make those plays. You have Tyreek Hill, you have Damien Williams, you have Sammy Watkins, Mecole Hardman, Travis Kelce. Too many weapons, too many threats to cover at times. So hopefully the Tennessee Titans have learned, and they're going to come in and they're going to run the ball heavily, and they're going to dictate the game by running enough to where you can keep Matt Moore off the field, keep them out of a rhythm. So when your defense is on the field, they can cost them 3 and outs, keep Derrick Henry going, and he's going to have a pretty decent game in my eyes in Tennessee. He's my number 10. Moving on to number 11, Chris Carson. Chris Carson, yes, he fumbled last week, but hit over 100 rushing yards, was a big contributor and a big reason why Russell Wilson was able to produce so well. When the play action opens up so much because teams are threatened by Chris Carson's rushing ability, it only helps them going forward. Rashad Penny has done very little all season long, and I do not expect that to change. He'll come in every now and then, maybe catch a pass, maybe run a ball once or twice a game. It is not a big enough threat, and this week against the 49ers on Monday Night Football should be an exciting game. The team should have a pretty good amount of rest going into that. I think Chris Carson will be a running back to rely upon once again. Moving on to number 12, Le'Veon Bell. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. Had an MRI. We don't know if he's fully injured. We don't know if he's going to play this weekend. We will have more information as the week progresses if, in fact, Le'Veon Bell misses Friday practice. Code, red alert, DEFCON 1, fire the missiles, do everything. Literally, click the button because it is going to be a problem if he misses Friday. If, in fact, he does, hopefully we will have found a press conference by then where Adam Gase is a honest man and says this is our starting running back in this game, so that we can maybe pick up a replacement. But even then, it might be an RBBC. But if in fact Le'Veon Bell can play, I love the matchup against the Giants. Not a great up front 7, and I think as long as he can get work in the passing game, which he consistently does, that's where he finds a lot of value, and maybe he can score a touchdown this week. That's what I'm thinking against the Giants. Should be a pretty good back and forth matchup. All right, let's talk about my RB2s on the week. Guys that really, there's going to be a lot of guys on this list that weren't here in weeks past because of all the bye weeks. We'll talk about them in a little bit, but guys are making some pretty big jumps this week. But that being said, again, rankings are always subject to change, and we're going to start off with my number 13, Mark Ingram, playing against the Cincinnati Bengals, the defense that's giving up the second most points to the opposing running back position. I think Mark Ingram is in line for another fantastic week. The guy's played really well all season long. Sure, he isn't, really balanced his scoring potential really well. I mean, I'm looking at his scoring this season. He has a couple good double-digit scoring games, similar to last week when you have 15 carries for 115 yards. That's beautiful. That's exactly what we want to see. But we want touchdowns as well. When you have a 33-point, 3-touchdown game against Kansas City earlier in the season, or you had you had a 22-point game against Miami in Week 1. Sure, that balances it that way. But you're always capable of screwing us over, not getting a touchdown, only getting 60 rushing yards, and putting up a goose egg week. I don't think this is one of those weeks, though. I think Cincinnati's too easy of a matchup. Even when they played Cincinnati last time, dude had 13 carries for 52 yards and a touchdown. Easy week, easy night, and he was off to the bench to relax for the rest of the game. It should be another one of those. That's why he's at 13. I don't expect a nice, 25-point game. I expect a mild 15-point game, which is absolutely fantastic for a guy like Mark Ingram. Moving on to number 14, David Johnson. I think David Johnson has a very good likelihood of playing this week. In fact, all signs are kind of pointing towards it. If, in fact, he continues on that path, practices at least limitedly or fully by Friday, we're going to see him play this week. And there's always a potential of him and Kenyan Drake splitting snaps. Perfectly fine. I am in line for that, and I'm perfectly okay with that against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because David Johnson is a wide receiver. Yes, he might get carries out of the backfield, but the guy is certainly a guy that can find his value in the receiving game and be perfectly fine with that. So as of right now, if in fact he does practice by Friday, I like David Johnson as my number 14 back. Moving on to number 15, Melvin Gordon. All right, now Melvin Gordon really had a huge week. Over 100 yards from scrimmage. That's something we hadn't seen him do all season long. We hadn't seen him break over 50 yards from scrimmage all season long until last week. Now, he had 20 carries on the ground. Are those 20 carries going to continue? Are we going to see him get a lot of work on the ground going into Thursday night's matchup? Is this running back, is this performance that they had against the Green Bay Packers, is it fugazi? Is it just a mirage? Was it just a bad game by the Packers overall as an organization? Or is this a shift, a paradigm shift for this team? Something clicked this past week to kind of get them back on track. Is that a possibility? I'm hoping that Melvin Gordon is back on track. I'm hoping he is. Now, whether or not he ends up getting back on track, it's only a matter of time until what we see here. As of right now, the Oakland Raiders, they give up the 17th fewest points. On a per weekly basis, they don't give up too many points to opposing running backs. Last week, the Lions didn't really have to run the ball. Before that, Carlos Hyde has played well against them, but a lot of teams don't really run the ball against the Oakland Raiders. They typically just pass the ball because the secondary is mainly their weakness. If, in fact, Melvin Gordon gets, taken out of the game script potentially, I wouldn't be surprised. But I also do believe this team wants to run the ball. Their head coach was a running backs coach for the Buffalo Bills before he got hired to be the Los Angeles Chargers head coach. They want to run the ball. They want to get Melvin Gordon back into the rhythm. That's how they're going to win games. He's my number 15. Moving on to number 16. Speaking of Buffalo Bills, we're talking about Devin Singletary. Oh, Devin Singletary. This is the week. You're going to do it. You're playing against the Browns. For the love of God, you're playing against the Browns. The Browns are a mess. Their organization is not doing anything correctly. If, in fact, you cannot take advantage of this said matchup, it's going to be very, very, very unfortunate. But as of right now, the Browns, they give up the ninth most points to opposing running backs thus far this season in terms of what they've done. Phillip Lindsay had 10 yards per carry. The week before that, Sony Michel 21 for 74. The week before that was a bye week. The week before that, Chris Carson 24 for 124. Tevin Coleman 16 for 97. Matt Breida 11 for 114. Mark Ingram 12 for 71. Every running back has played well against this team. Devin Singletary, I expect you to do the same. You're my number 16. Number 17, Todd Gurley. Gurley sits at 17 because I am uncertain of his presence and his contribution. What the hell was that? His contribution to the team. I don't know if we're going to see a 5-carry Todd Gurley or a 15-carry Todd Gurley. And I don't know if we're going to see a 2-touchdown Todd Gurley or a 0-touchdown Todd Gurley. That's what scares me. I'm expecting at least 1 touchdown from the goal line, and I'm expecting him to at least have 50 yards from scrimmage. A 12-point week, that's what I anticipate. The upside of a 20-point week, always there because he's a part of the Rams offense and because he's Todd Gurley. But we'll just have to wait and see. He's my number 17 on the week. Moving on to number 18. David Montgomery playing against the worst defense against the run. Mitchell Trubisky cannot play offense. He cannot play quarterback. So Matt Nagy needs to sit down. He needs to think, what are we best at? We're not good on defense anymore. Chuck Pagano is definitely not doing his job correctly. But we're not good at special teams either. We can't kick field goals. But we can run the ball. We drafted this guy in the 3rd round to come in, fill in for Jordan Howard, and be a producing running back that is, going to run all over teams. Somehow Jordan Howard's having a great year, by the way. Really is turning around last couple weeks. Really, really, really playing well. Good for him. But I think David Montgomery this week should be great. as my number 18 into the easiest matchup of the week. He's my number 18. Moving on to number 19, Matt Breida. Matt Breida only sits down here because of the fact that I don't know who's going to be the starting running back of this team. 1 week it's Tevin Coleman, 1 week it's Matt Breida. 1 week it's Raheem Mostert. 1 week it's back to Matt Breida. Then it's back to Tevin Coleman. I don't know, and I don't think Kyle Shanahan knows either. That's what makes it such a difficult prospect of ranking 49ers backfield running backs at this moment in time. I do believe both are going to be good. I do believe Matt Breida last week on an injured leg produced an incredible amount of yards on the ground, and I think going forward should be perfectly fine. I mean, the fact that Tevin Coleman disappeared after a 4-touchdown week, and then we all of a sudden have, Matt Breida ripping off for huge runs. I mean, and just dominating the game. We didn't see much of Tevin Coleman at all last week. It leads me to believe that it really is a hot hand kind of deal. They're running with the hot hand, and that's perfectly fine because if Matt Breida ends up being the hot hand again and gets himself 17 plus carries, then he can obviously find himself in the end zone and be perfectly fine. As of right now, he's my number 19. Moving on to 20, Devonta Freeman. I expect Devonta Freeman to be a running back in which he's not going to be able to run the ball this week, but he will be able to catch the ball out of the backfield. I expect a little bit of contributions from perhaps Ito Smith coming back or maybe even Brian Hill, which will kind of hurt him a little bit, but all in all, still in a game in which they're going to have to score a lot of points because their defense sucks and they're coming off a bye week and hopefully Matt Ryan's healthy. They're going to have to dump off the ball heavily to Devonta Freeman, which is where he's found majority of his value all season long anyway. Devonta Freeman is pretty much become a PPR back. He's nothing more than that. Really, I'm not even kidding. In terms of his yardage and his contributions to this offense, it's really all in the PPR game. I mean, just looking at his touches as of late, sure, there are some games in which he'll get 19 touches for 88 rushing yards, but then you'll see 7 for 19, 13 for 39, 11 for 30, 12 for 28. On the ground has not been great, but through the air, the guy will produce, 3 catches, 30 yards, 2 touchdowns, 5 catches, 40 yards, and a touchdown, 8 catches for 63, 9 catches for 72. That's where he finds his value, and in a half PPR where I rank players, it doesn't go much, it doesn't go much past the number 20 spot unless he scores a touchdown. So being able to predict that's pretty tough also. So we put him at 20. Moving on to number 21, Jamaal Williams. Speaking of guys catching balls, Jamaal Williams has caught a touchdown each of the last 4 weeks. Am I surprised? Absolutely not. And I think he's going to do it again this week. Against Carolina, a defense that has not played well against running backs at all. Jamaal Williams' contributions in this offense, the fact that he plays so much despite Aaron Jones' presence, it's incredible. It is a show of faith from the head coach that we believe that both of these guys are great running backs, and we're going to continue to use them both not equally, but exclusively to their own respective strengths. Jamaal Williams is a better receiving back. He's a better pass blocking back. Therefore, he will get the third down work, and he's produced heavily on it. He's my number 21 on the week. Should be another good one for him. Moving on to 22, Tevin Coleman. Just mentioned Tevin Coleman. I don't know if it's going to be him or Breida. If you are looking or in search for whether or not you have to play Tevin Coleman this week, it's tough. I think the matchup against the Seahawks is favorable to an extent, but are we 100% convinced that a guy like Tevin Coleman on a weekly basis can contribute on this team when they're going off of a hot hand kind of approach in the backfield? I don't think that's something that we want to go in and tap into or commit to. So as of right now, sitting him at as a low-end fringe RB2, RB3 is probably the best spot for him at this moment in time. So we'll leave him at my number 22. Moving on to number 23, Damien Williams. We saw a surge of Damien Williams this past week and a complete no-show performance from LeSean McCoy. Are we surprised? Absolutely not. We saw Damien Williams step up and produce out of the backfield, having himself over 100 yards, having himself that touchdown, making big plays when they are in really desperate need of big plays. This week they get to play against Tennessee. Tennessee is a very good front seven rushing defense. And you may be thinking, well, Christian McCaffrey was so good. Christian McCaffrey is the best running back in the NFL. Damien Williams is nowhere close to that. And as of right now, that's why he sits here. Because I'm truly not convinced off of one performance. I need more. I need a little bit more. And then we'll go ahead and confirm. All right, moving on to 24, Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones has been confirmed to be the starting running back for this Buccaneers offense. What does that mean? It only means a green light, that we're going to give him the ball more often. He already sees the ball like 18 times. Does it make a difference? No. I think it's a pretty favorable matchup. I know the Cardinals have been better in the last couple weeks in terms of stopping the run, but they are always, susceptible to playing bad defense. They're not shy of that. So I think Ronald Jones is my number 24, especially with all the bye weeks, not a bad option. Moving on, let's talk about right here, James Conner. If James Conner plays this week, Jaylen Samuels can be like a maybe 36 running back. He'll be like a lower end RB3. And James Conner this week against the Rams would probably be, in my opinion, number 19. He'd be ahead of Breida, below David Montgomery, just so that we're all on the same page. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about the last group of running backs before we close off today's video. Number 25, going straight seamlessly from James Conner into Jaylen Samuels. If James Conner's out and Jaylen Samuels is the only running back to play, because we still have, again, Conner with a shoulder injury. Trey Edmonds, the other running back, he also got a little bit banged up. He might not play this week. We still have, Snell with another injury himself, knee surgery. He's going to be out. Jaylen Samuels caught 13 catches on 13 targets. In a full PPR, this dude would be a way higher, running back rank. But at this moment in time, in a half PPR, he sits at 25 because he didn't see much on the ground. And yes, I understand the Rams aren't good against stopping receiving running backs, and that's where he's going to get his value, and that's why he sits at this fringe. Anyway, moving on, let's talk about another receiving running back, Austin Ekeler. Austin Ekeler, again, last week had a good game, 70 rushing yards. He was able to even produce on the ground. No one was really shy of producing well against that defense, maybe except for Keenan Allen, who hasn't shown up in weeks. Even Mike Williams had a good game, and still Keenan Allen nothing. So that was interesting. But regardless, I think Austin Ekeler should be fine this week on Thursday night matchup. All right, moving on. Let's talk about number 27, Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon gets to play against the Ravens. I have 27 at Joe Mixon because he's a starting running back. When we look at everybody underneath him, they are either starting running backs or in a RBBC committee situation in which they're not going to get every single touch on all three downs of offense. Joe Mixon is capable, and that's why he's at 27, purely off opportunity, and because you never know. If the Ravens fumble on their own 1 yard line and Joe Mixon shows up and runs in for a 1 yard touchdown, he can make up a 10-point week like that. So I'm never going to always count a guy like this out. He'll always be on the list despite the matchup and all this kind of jazz. I still have a lot of hope that Joe Mixon can get it done. He's number 27. Number 28, Latavius Murray. Here's my thought process. I think this is going to be a blowout. When I mean by blowout is, yes, the Falcons are going to score points, but I think this is going to be a very one-sided matchup to the point where the New Orleans Saints put up a lot of points, and then maybe late in the game we'll have Atlanta make a roar like they typically do. And that's just going to lead to Latavius Murray getting touches in order to make sure that they can keep Alvin Kamara healthy, but I still do think that both of them are going to be used. It's a two-headed monster scheme. I've been talking about it for the last 2 years. Latavius Murray, Alvin Kamara, two-headed monster, should be good to go. I expect him to have some production at least. They're not going to disappear on a guy that has carried the ball 27 times each of the last 2 games and produced so heavily. You might as well just have him as a starting running back of the team. Moving on to number 29, Kenyan Drake. If David Johnson does play, I still think he's going to get work. If David Johnson's a no-go, Kenyan Drake, even higher ranking, no problem. I could probably have him as my number 24 back, and I'd be really happy with it playing against Tampa Bay this week. So that's not a problem at all. Moving on to number 30, Ty Johnson. The only reason he's here is because the Bears cannot stop the run. Now, whether it's him, J.D. McKissick, or some other running back that wants to step up for this team, I don't know. But as of right now, all signs point to him being the starting running back with only 9 touches last week and really just no production in the last 2 weeks. This rookie running back is truly running out of time and might lose his job to a potential free agent signee in the coming weeks if he cannot get the job done. Moving on to number 31, with Mark Walton out, it will be Kallen Ballage taking the reins at the RB1 position of the Dolphins. Is that of any value? Absolutely not. But I will give Kallen Ballage the benefit of the doubt that in this week against the Indianapolis Colts, perhaps he could score something or do something of some sort. He is a starting running back. Moving on, number 32, Frank Gore. I know Devin Singletary had a huge week last week, and he looks to be in line for more work in that direction. But if, in fact, he does not get that work, and Frank Gore is taking carries, I'm not going to be surprised. Frank Gore is still in this backfield. They still want to run the ball. Frank Gore still has gas left in the tank. They will use him. He is my number 32 on the week. Moving on to number 33. Like I mentioned earlier, Mark Ingram sometimes has a easy day, 13 carries, 50 yards, and a touchdown, then disappears. Gus Edwards would then come in and run all over the Cincinnati Bengals in the second half, like I expected him to do earlier this season. Didn't get the job done, but his usage from last week against the Patriots, pretty promising in my eyes. He should be pretty good this week. Moving on to 34, I do not believe Todd Gurley will be alone in this backfield. Darrel Henderson is getting more and more work. Bye-bye Malcolm Brown. And here comes Henderson, the third-round pick out of Kentucky. I think this guy can potentially see a good amount of work. And if, in fact, they can continue to get him more work, get him more experience in the game, especially on third downs, this could be very good for this offense. I expect him to get touches in this game, certainly. Moving on to 35, Tarik Cohen. Again, Cohen's always got some potential in a PPR, half PPR format to catch a couple passes. If he does, congratulations. He has value. But the fact that he even had a goal line rushing attempt is kind of ridiculous. But I regress. Either way. The last running back I wanted to mention, LeSean McCoy. Don't have much hope in him, but he, again, could do something. I doubt it, but we're thin on running backs, and there weren't a lot of guys to put here. Was it going to put Brian Hill here? Absolutely freaking not. I'm putting LeSean McCoy, and I'm ending the video on that. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you liked today's video, click that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on all of the 2019 fantasy football news, rankings, etc. going throughout the season. Don't forget, Sunday mornings, 8:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time will be our live stream. And thank you again for watching. Tomorrow, Wide Receiver Wednesday, we'll be talking about the wide receiver position. And until then, thank you, everybody, again, and I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.